everyone, my name is NewFlowerGirl, but you can call me Demi, and today if I sound a bit far away, then it's because I'm standing up this time because it's too hot to sit in my chair right now. But today we're going to be learning about Formula 1 regulation changes from when it first started in 1950 till the present day, till 2021. Even though Formula 1 has already raced in 1948, they were not the championship. So in 1950 they started to add the championship in. But I hope you guys are going to enjoy this one as well. As you can see on the screen we have displayed a few of the cars. Of course, we are at the beginning in the top left. We have one of the earliest. In the bottom right, we have Lewis Hamilton. How can we not include him? And I think above Lewis Hamilton, it is Michael Schumacher. But yeah, it's really hard to tell. But yeah, let's start. And I hope you guys are staying hydrated during this super warm period. So, let's go. The regulations governing Formula 1 racing have changed many times throughout the history of the sport. Formula 1's rules and regulations are set by the sport's governing body, the FIA. The primary reasons behind rule changes have traditionally been to do with safety. As each decade has passed, the FIA have made more and more changes in the regulations so that better facilities and equipment are available in the event of an accident at race meetings. These rule changes have also been aimed at eliminating dangerous practices from the sport in effort to make it safer. Many innovations and technological improvements have been banned over the years as a result of FIA regulation changes. The governing body have taken these actions to slow the cars down to a level where a Grand Prix can be driven relatively safely. Without this pruning of the sport's technological advancement, cars today would be capable of cornering speeds in excess of 300 km/h. An accident whilst negotiating a corner at this speed would almost certainly result in the death of a driver. Since 2000, the FIA has been issuing an increasing number of rule changes to limit the cost of the sport. The cost of running a team in the sport has increased dramatically in the recent years, and this situation has not proved sustainable. From 2009 onwards, Formula 1 has committed itself to dramatic reductions in expenditure. So, we're now going to go to 1950s. Although Formula 1 races have been taking place since 1948, as I told before, it was not until 1950 that the World Championship was established. Safety was almost a non-issue. In the first 10 years of racing, and technological process was extremely slow compared to the modern standards. All of the circuits that Formula 1 raced on in the 1950s had no safety features. The general mentality was that death was an acceptable risk for winning races, and as a result, very few regulations were changed during this period. 1950 till 1953. Engine specs set at 1500 cc maximum size for engines with a compressor, supercharger or turbocharger, or it's too hot. It's really hot right now, so or 4500 cc for naturally aspirated engines. No weight limit. Note that in 1950 1952 and 1953, the World Drivers' Championship was run to Formula 2 regulations. Maximum capacity of 750 cc for engines with a compressor and 2000 cc for natural aspirated engines. But the Formula 1 regulations remained unchanged, and numerous non-championship Formula 1 races were held during this period. Also, for 1952, crash helmets were made compulsory, but these helmets were made with dubious materials and looked like medium-sized dinner bowls. 1954. Engine specs aimed to allow 750 cc maximum engine size with a compressor or 2500 cc for a naturally aspirated engine. No weight limit. 1958. The use of commercial petrol became compulsory and alcohol-based racing fuels were banned. And now we're going to go to 1960s. The 1960s began the way the previous decade had ended for Formula One's rulebook, with relatively few changes made. However, with the advent of a new breed of innovative and forward-thinking designers like Colin Chapman, and the beginnings of drivers lobbying for safer racing conditions, the number of rules changes made began to accelerate as the decade came to a close. 1960. Regulations unchanged from 1959, maximum engine capacity of 750 cc for a compressed engine or 2500 cc for naturally aspirated engines. No weight restrictions. 1961 till 1965. Engine specs amended to naturally aspirated engine between 1300 cc and 1500 cc. No compressors allowed. Minimum weight set at 450 kilograms. Pump fuel only. Automatic starter, roll bar required. Double braking system mandatory. Standardized seat belt anchorage. Fire protection for fuel tanks, filters and breathers. FIA began to organize safety inspections previously done by local authorities. Protective helmets and overalls obligatory. Flag signals and signals code established. That was a big mouthful. Basically, that whole part was one entire sentence. I don't think people will be able to read that or understand it like me. But now, 1966 till 1969. Engine specs amended to a 1500 cc engine with a compressor or a 3000 cc naturally aspirated engine allowed. Minimum weight set at 500 kilograms, electrical circuit breaker, reverse gear, oil catch tank, a roll bar 5 centimeters above driver's head, two-part extinguish system and cockpit designed for quick evacuation, all made mandatory. All aerodynamic features must be immobile, thereby banning air brakes, and fixed to a sprung part of the car. Maximum bodywork height and width restrictions ban the use of the use of dangerous high wings. Recommendations made on seat harnesses, fire-resistant clothing, and shatterproof visors. Straw bales or hay bales were banned from being used as safety barriers, in response to Lorenzo Bandini's fatal accident in Monaco in 1967. And I have to point out that he was the only one to have a fatal accident and had passed away from that accident. He had died from that accident. He was the only one to die on Monaco doing what he loved. So, yeah. So if people are still considering Monaco dangerous, take a look at how many people walked away from like dangerous crashes. Only one person died there. So stop considering Monaco as dangerous. There are way more circuits that are way more dangerous. But now we're going to go on to, I think, a more dangerous part, more dangerous place or time in Formula 1, which is 1970. Which is, I think, also the year where Niki Lauda had his crash at the Nordschleife, or the Green Hell. I don't know. But let's go. The speed of Formula 1 cars had increased dramatically since 1950, but the standard of safety at race meetings had not followed suit. Deaths were still common, and there were many factors at play to blame. Many drivers felt that the danger level involved in the sport was unnecessarily high, despite the changes in the rules that had been implemented by the end of the 1960s. The drivers' crusade for improved safety was led in the 1970s by Jackie Stewart. After the needless and avoidable death of Ronnie Peterson at the Italian Grand Prix in 1978, the sport finally made the wholesome changes needed to bring it up towards the modern standard of safety, which it enjoys today. The 1970s was the last decade that Formula 1 raced at truly long circuits, with lap times close to or over 3 minutes. And going into the decade, Formula 1 still raced at the 5-mile charade circuit, the 8.7-mile Spa-Francorchamps, and the 14.2-mile Nürburgring Nordschleife, aka the Green Hell. Although all the aforementions circuits were improved with safety features. By 1977, Charade, Spa, and the Nürburgring were no longer on the calendar. All for the same general reason: safety concerns. Safer circuits as Paul-Ricard, Zolder, and Hockenheimring were built with safety features installed. And at the end of the decade, Formula 1 had become a safer sport, although it was still dangerous. Ground effect, a technology that was able to create huge amounts of downforce with inverted aerofoils mounted to the sides of the car, was discovered and developed by Colin Chapman and his Lotus team in the mid-70s, and the technology was perfected with the dominant Type 79. All the other teams followed suit, and the performance of the cars was skyrocketed over a period of 2 years. That's the introduction. Now we're gonna go to 1970, the start of it. Minimum weight set at 530 kilograms. Safety bladder fuel cell tanks introduced. Reportedly published on track standards recommended straw bales be banned, or hay bales. Double guardrails in place, 3-meter grass verges. Spectators to be kept in a minimum distance of 3 meters behind guard railings. barriers between pit lane and track, as well as track width, surface, and gradient recommendations, and mandatory FIA inspections of track facilities. It's really long. 1971. Role, responsibilities, and mandatory equipment list set out for race supervisors, marshals, and signalers. Drivers must be evacuated from cockpit in less than 5 seconds. All race distances must be under 200 miles, which is 302 kilometers. Minimum weight increased to 550 in 1972. Safety foam in the fuel tanks. No magnesium sheeting to be less than 3 millimeters thick. 15W red rear light mandatory. Headrest required. Minimum cockpit dimensions. Combined electrical cutoff and extinguisher external handle required. Fuel tanks to meet FIA specifications. 6-point harness required. Circuit safety criteria set down. Driver's code of conduct released. 1973. Numbers are now assigned to the drivers. The hashtag 1 number, or number 1, is assigned to the reigning world champion. Minimum weight increased to 575. Crushable structure around fuel tanks. Mandatory. No chrome plating of suspension parts allowed to avoid hydrogen embrittlement. Drivers required to carry medical card and submit to medical examination before they are able to race. Catch fencing and rescue equipment mandatory at races. Starting grid dimensions. Standardized fire service regulations established. I took a little sip of my drink because it's really hot. (1974) Self-sealing fuel lines mandatory. Sand traps added to catch fencing as safety features at circuits. 2x2 staggered starting grid with 2 meters allowed per car. Marshal, and that was 1974. 1975. Marshal posts to be provided with surface roads of ease of access. FIA standard set fire resistant clothing. 1976. Airboxes on top of the car are banned, and the cooling of engines through similar means is heavily limited. Safety structures around dashboard and pedals implemented. After Niki Lauda's near-fatal accident at a nearly inaccessible point at the treacherous Nürburgring in West Germany, the circuit was taken off the 1977 calendar after having been on the calendar for all but 4 seasons in Formula 1 up to 1976. I knew that this was the year where Lauda had crashed. 1977. Pedal box safety structures more adequately defined. Gravel traps defined more adequately. Helmets must be made to FIA approved standards. 1978. Brabham's BT46B fan car deemed illegal and banned after its first and only appearance of the season, where it won at the Swedish Grand Prix. Bulkhead behind driver and front roll bar defined. License qualification criteria set for all drivers. All grid slots are allocated 14 meters per car. Following a request from Lotus, a single centrally mounted fuel tank between the driver and the engine is permitted. Previously, more than 80 liters of fuel in a single tank is allowed, meaning most cars required 3 separate fuel tanks, usually two back tanks either side of the driver's cockpit, and another fuel tank behind him. However, this requires multiple fuel lines for various tanks, and it's the sharing of the fuel lines in impacts that causes the fires of Joe Siffert, Roger Williamson, and Niki Lauda. Therefore, a central single fuel tank pioneered by Lotus becomes accepted as a safer option to stop fuel lines from side impacts being shared and igniting. 1979. Medical card required to be put into driver's helmet in the event of an accident. Bigger cockpit opening, 2 mirrors, and better fire extinguisher on board cars required. FIA appointed professional permanent race starter mandatory. There's a lot of words I do not understand, but let me have another sip of my drink real quick. And I would also like to point out that today, the day I'm recording this, which is Thursday the 17th, today one of my best friends, has reached 400 subscribers. He's actually already passed it. And yeah, congratulations to him if you're watching it to this far. Yeah, hope you will get even more subscribers, because it's like a big, it's like a big kick, as in like, yes, I'm good, So yeah, let's hope more will follow. And if you guys are not subscribed to him, then you guys quickly go to it. Alright? Give him some love. But now we're going to go to 1980s. With the raft of safety improvements as a result of Peterson's fatal crash being implemented during the late 70s and early 80s, Formula One overall became much safer despite the deaths of Patrick Depailler in 1980 and Gilles Villeneuve and Ricciardo Valetti in 1982. The huge amounts of downforce created by ground effect became increasingly dangerous as years went on, and aside from the fatal accidents mentioned above, or mentioned before, a number of drivers crashed heavily enough for their careers to be brought to an end, and the technology was banned outright at the start of the 1983 season. These safety changes, coupled with the much stronger carbon fiber replacing aluminium as the material of choice for chassis construction, meant there was not a single driver fatality at a race meeting for the rest of the decade. However, one factor threatening to undo all this process was the almost exponential power increases being extracted from turbocharged engines. Renault proved in 1980 that turbocharging was the way to go to success, with their very dominant performances in qualifying in almost every race, especially on fast and high altitude circuits, where the thinner air did not affect the turbocharged engines, with power output doubling in less than 10 years, and figures in excess of 1,400 bhp, or in other words, well, I'm not gonna say that. Talked about by engine manufacturers from 1968 onwards. The FIA's primary goal was to rein the turbo engines before finally banning them altogether at the end of 1988 season. Brabantine owner Bernie Ecclestone and ex-March team owner Max Mosley set a new organisation standards for Formula One, something they had been working on since 1972. All the races are now more organised by Formula One management instead of circuit organisers doing their own thing, such as setting specific times for when races, practice sessions and qualifying sessions are to start, and teams must commit to all of however many races are in a season, in order to assure sponsors that their advertising will be seen by television cameras, which was also an enterprise set up by Ecclestone and Mosley. This effectively transported the sport into the multi-billion-dollar business it is today. 1980. Permanent medical facility required at all tracks. These facilities must be staffed by FIA-approved medics. Fast response car mandatory at all races. Minimum weight for F1 cars set at 575. 1981. The new Formula One World Championship is officially established by Formula One management, an organisation headed by Britain's Bernie Ecclestone and Max Mosley. Though the teams and the FIA's signing of the first Concord Agreement concocted by Ecclestone and Mosley, they officially set newly organised standards, such as no more sequences of races being run over a period of 7 months, a practice and quali sessions at and the races being started at official times. The series is now an official business operating by its own operational standards while adhering to regulations set by the FIA. All the circuits organisers must comply with these standards and regulations. This includes private entries of other makes of car disallowed. Any team entering an official championship Formula One must enter their own cars, and all teams have to commit to the number of races scheduled each season. Although the teams have to make their own cars, they are still allowed to purchase engines and gearboxes from independent manufacturers. Flexible side skirts banned to reduce downforce created by ground effect. Mandatory ground clearance of 6 centimeters required to limit ground effect further. Lotus thin chassis type H8 outlawed. Pit lane minimum width set at 10 meters. Survival cell extending to the front of the driver's feet introduced to improve driver survivability in the event of an accident. Minimum weight of car set at 585 kilograms. 1982. Rotary engines, diesel engines, gas turbine engines, and I don't know how you say that. Surge orbital engines, all banned as part of the Concord agreement. Rigid skirts legalized and ride helmet restrictions removed, as FIA admit that policing a ban is not possible, whilst many teams are using hydraulic suspension systems to alter ride height and circumvent the rule's minimum weight of cars set at 580. I might have to stop halfway because in an hour I have my next lesson, but we'll just go until we'll just go another half an hour, and then after that I'll come back for this. But now, 1983. Ground effect outlawed completely for the beginning of the 1983 season. All cars returned to a flat undertray 4-wheel drive banned, along with cars with more than 4 wheels. There was legit a car with 6 wheels. It looked pretty though. It was a nice car. Minimum weight set at 540. 1984. In race refueling outlawed, fuel tanks required to be in center of car, between driver and engine. Maximum fuel capacity allowed on cars set at 220 liters per race to try and reduce the output of turbo engines. Drivers required to have an FIA super license before they can compete in Formula 1. Concrete retaining walls permitted alongside guardrails. 1955. Rear ring size limits set in place. All cars now subject to a frontal crash test to be deemed race-worthy. 1986. Catch fencing banned. Permanent FIA medical service inspector and medevac helicopter mandatory at race meetings. All needless death after needless death of Elio De Angelis in testing. All F1 test sessions to be completed under full race meeting safety conditions. Engine capacity at 1500 cc with compressor. Naturally aspirated engines prohibited. Maximum fuel consumption reduced to 195 liters per race. 1987, sorry. Boost pressure capped at 4.0 bars to limit turbo power. Minimum weight of cars set at 500 kilograms. Naturally aspirated engines are permitted again, with a maximum capacity of 3,500 cc and no fuel limit. Grid slots are located 60 meters per car. FIA announced that from 1989 onwards, turbos will be banned, and to encourage teams to switch to 2 additional championships are introduced, which are open to non-turbo teams only. The Jim Clark Cup for drivers and the Colin Chapman Trophy for constructors. These one-off championships are won by Jonathan Palmer and Tyrrell Ford respectively. Boost pressure in 1988 further reduced to a maximum of 2.5 to limit the power output of the turbo engines in their final year until 2014. Maximum fuel consumption of turbo cars reduced to 150 liters per race. In any design, the driver's feet must not extend beyond the wheel axle. Static crash test of survival cell and fuel cell mandatory. Minimum weight of cars increased to to 540 kilograms. 1989. Turbocharged engines banned completely. Naturally aspirated engines of 3,500 cc in size and 8 to 12 cylinders, the only engines permitted. Overhead air intakes allowed again. Few restrictions removed. All track side guards rails must be a minimum of 1 meter in height, and the pit wall must be a minimum of 1 meter 35 centimeters in height. All drivers subject to anti-doping tests as per IOC guidelines. Okay. Now to sip my drink. I might be able to finish it just before, because now we are already in the 1990s. But first, sip my drink. Right. Despite several near misses, particularly during the turbo era, Formula 1 had managed to go almost 2 whole years without a single fatality at a race meeting. The strength of the carbon fiber chassis being used and the fortunate escapes of many drivers involved in high-speed accidents during this period made people inside the sport believe that death was a thing of the past in Formula 1. I'm with my mic, by the way, just so you know. This attitude was made to look foolish when the FIA hastily banned virtually all of the performance-enhancing electronic technology that the teams had become dependent on for the start of the 1994 season. This made many of that year's cars nervy and edgy to drive, with more horsepower than 1993, but with less in-car stability. Some observers at the time, most notably Ayrton Senna, stated that he believed 1994 would be a season with lots of accidents. Near fatal accidents of J.J. Lento and John Alesi during pre-season and in-season testing were both to prove Senna right. This was climaxed by the catastrophic 1994 San Marino Grand Prix, with Brazilian Rubens Barrichello being severely injured during a heavy crash in a Friday practice session. This set the stage of the disastrous event of the rest of the weekend, which led to the deaths of Austrian driver Roland Ratzenberg and Ayrton Senna himself, all 3 accidents on consecutive days. The sweeping edge that the FIA implemented post-Imola proved to be almost a rush as the ones at the end of 1993, and nearly claimed the life of Pedro Lamy in a testing accident. The cause of the accident was put down as a rear wing failure as a result of the FIA rushing through new rules, including one reducing the size of the rear diffuser, which reduced the number of anchoring points the attached rear wing assembly could use. To its credit, the FIA learned from the mistakes of 1994, and much more consideration and forward thinking was put into changes made to the rules from there onwards. By the close of the decades, a measure of the impact on the sport was that the 1994 San Marino Grand Prix was that for the first time in its history, safety had become Formula One's #1 concern. 1990, large mirrors and quick-release steering wheel made mandatory. All marshals and medical staff must practice driver extraction exercises. I have seen some of those on YouTube. It is really interesting. 1991, front wing narrowed from 150 centimeters, which was 59 inch, to 140 centimeter, and that is 55 inch. Rear overhang reduced from 60 centimeters, 24 inch, to 50 centimeters, 20 inch. More stringent tests of survival cell by FIA, including seat belts, fuel tanks and roll bar. Point scoring system overhauled. Win now secures 10 points and all results to count instead of best 11 scores. 1992. Yet more exhaustive testing of survival cell, including rear impact testing. Height of curbing lowered. Minimum width of pit lane increased to 12 meters, which was 39 feet. Pit lane entry chicane mandatory. Safety car introduced. We all know the safety car. 1993. Rear tire width reduced from 18 inches, which was 457 millimeters, to 15 inches, 381 millimeters, to reduce the grip and so the speed of the cars. Overall car width reduced from 220 centimeters to 200 centimeters. Rear wing height reduced from 100 centimeters to 90 centimeters. Distance of front end plates from flat bottom increased from 25 to 40 millimeters. Headrest area increased from 80 to 400 square centimeters. Continuously variable transmission banned before ever appearing at a race. End of a race crowd control measures implemented. 500 km per hour speed lane restrictions during free practice. Fuel use restrictions available to the general public. Don't know what that means. 1994. Ban on electronic driver aids such as active suspension, traction control, launch control, ABS, and without ever appearing in a race, four-wheel steering. At the beginning of the season, mid-race refueling allowed for the first time since 1983. Pit crews now required to wear fireproof racing suits in conjunction with return of refueling. Post-Imola sweeping changes introduced cars to slow down, starting from the Monaco race onwards. A pit lane speed limit is put in place between the Spanish Grand Prix and the German Grand Prix. Additionally, changes are phased in and include a reduction of the height of the rear wing to 10 centimeters, an increase of the height of the front wing, not front wing trailing assemblies, to extend behind front wheel. A 10 mm wooden plank fitted to the undertray permitted to be worn by no more than 1 mm by end of the race. A ban on high rear wing assemblies extending ahead of the rear axle line to sidestep the wing height restrictions, depressurizing the engine airbox to reduce power, minimum headrest thickness to 75 millimeters, introduced more stringent fire extinguisher regulations and driver helmet criteria implemented, a pit lane speed restriction of 80 kilometers per hour, which is 50 mph, in practice, and 120 kilometers per hour, which is 75 mph, in race conditions. Introduced also the parade lap was to be completed behind safety car, abandoned from Imola onwards. Pit spectator area to be fire shielded. 27 corners identified as very high risk as a result changes to circuit layouts implemented to remove or modify these parts of the track. After Imola, pit lane speed limits is implemented. A reduction in engine capacity from 3,500 to 3,000 cc to further slow cars. Longer and higher cockpit openings to reduce chance of impact with driver's head in the event of an accident. Survival cells side impact tests introduced. Obligation automatic neutral section with engine stops. Increase in the length or the length chassis must extend beyond driver's feet from 15 to 30 centimeters. Frontal impact test speeds increased from 1 minute per second to 12 minutes per second. Curbs made smoother. Pit wall debris shield installed. 3-inch safety straps mandatory. Super license criteria and fuel restrictions made more stringent. Spectacle special racing fuels, previously an exotic mixture of benzenes and toulones and something else, are banned. Only those with similar characteristics to everyday unleased petrol are permitted. 1996. Increased cockpit protection around the driver's head. Front wing end plates to be no more than 10 millimeters thick to reduce damage to tires and to tires of other cars to tires of another car in the event of collision. All harnesses release levers must point downwards. To qualify for a race, cars must now be within 107% of pole time. The 107% rule got implemented. Cars numbers now are located on the basis of previous season's performance. Friday qualifying abandoned, but number of free practice sessions increased from 2 to 3, and number of laps allocated each day increased from 23 to 30. Standardization of all FIA safety cars and medical cars. More fire drills for marshals. Starting producer improved. Data storage units to be mounted within survival cell. 1997. Test tracks now require FIA approval and supervision. Curbing standardized. Bolted tire wall construction obligatory. Cars to carry FIA ADR, accident data recovery, to analyze success of implemented safety measures. FIA approval required for all chief medical officers and medical centers. safety car made more powerful and may now be used for wet weather starts. Accident interventions planned revised. 1998. Narrow track era begins in Formula One. Width of car reduced from 2 meters to 1.8 meters, with teams now running rubber with 14mm grooves. In 4 on the rear and 3 on the front. To reduce the speed of the cars, a systematic braking banned. X-Wings banned mid-season. Single fuel bladder mandatory. Refueling connector must be covered. Cockpit dimensions increased. Side impact tests now use 100% more energy. Tire barrier effectiveness increased. Pit lane must now have a 10 meter of straight running before first pit garage. Increased use of pit lane lights alongside flags. 1999. Number of grooves on front tires increased from 3 to 4. Flexible wings banned. We now have an entire talk about flexible wings. Pit lane shielding standardized. Some runoff areas to have asphalt instead of sand traps. At least 4 medical intervention cars and an FIA doctor car required. ADR required to be in operation during testing. Wheels must be tethered to car to reduce the risk of launched components during an accident. Rear and lateral headrest assembly made one piece and quick release. Engine oil breathers must vent into engine air intake. Extractable driver's seat mandatory. Frontal impact test increased to 13 meters per second. So now I'm going to take a little break from this. I am going to finish this thing in one haul. It's going to be the longest podcast ever. But yeah, I'll be back whenever I have time. So yeah, see you in a bit. And I'm back. Now we are going to carry on with basically the years 2000, 2010 and 2020. It's basically what happens in the terms of regulation changes. The years 2000. By the end of the 1990s, safety standards had risen dramatically over the second time in 20 years. The deaths of marshals in both 2000 and 2001 after being struck by tires after accidents at the Italian and Australian Grand Prix respectively showed that the sport will never be completely safe. However, on the whole, the sport was in a much better shape safety-wise than it had been before. Save for the introduction of head and neck support system in 2003, there have been no major safety improvements in the sport since the turn of the millennium until the introduction of the halo in 2018, but we'll go over that later. Most of the changes that the FIA have implemented to the regulations in the 9 seasons since the year 2000 have been aimed at trimming speed of the cars and, later in the decade, at reducing the cost involving in Formula One. These have risen by a factor of between 3 and 4 for the top teams like Ferrari and McLaren. This sudden increase in budget has largely been down to the influx of big spending car manufacturers setting up teams in the sport, since Mercedes paved the way by buying 50% of the McLaren team. By 2008, with the global credit crunch turning into a full-blown global recession, many of the car manufacturers whose sales have been hit hard by the economic crisis can no longer afford a huge amount of money they are investing in the sport. The gravity of the situation was realized when Honda suddenly withdrew its participation at the end of the 2008 season, later confirming to have sold the team, specifically blaming the world economic crisis. With Toyota and BMW also withdrawing from the sport at the end of the following year, the remaining manufacturers, along with the FIA, agreed changes to the rules over the next season to bring about dramatic cost saving in an effort to save the sport from collapsing under the weight of its own costs. 2000. Engines mandated to be V10, displacing no more than 3000 cc. Red flag procedure changed where races stopped after 2 laps, but before 3 quarters. Race distance had been completed. Would be restarted with the cars lining up on the grid in the order they were at the end of the penultimate lap, before the lap which, during the red flag, was shown. They did not do that in Baku 2021. Just saying. Only the race order and number of laps completed were taken into account for the new race. Time differences between the cars were voided. The distance of the new race was the number of laps remaining from the original race minus 3 laps. Use of cooled fuel banned mid-season. 2001. Traction control allowed again from the Spanish Grand Prix. As the FIA admit they are unable to police whether teams are using the system effectively to gain a competitive advantage. Use of beryllium alloys in chassis or engine construction banned. Fully automatic transmissions and launch control were also allowed again from the 2001 Spanish Grand Prix. Larger cockpit entry, template and survival cell. Rear wings must have no more than 3 elements. 2002. Team orders banned mid-season after Rubens Barrichello hands victory to Michael Schumacher at the final corner of the Austrian Grand Prix. 2003, the year of my birth, when I was born. Bidirectional elementary banned. Hands system mandatory. Change to point scoring system. Points are now being awarded down to 8th place. Actual points scored now run to 10, 8, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. From 1st to 8th place. Testing allowed on a Friday of a race meeting in exchange for a reduction of testing mileage allowed outside of the Grand Prix calendar to make it more affordable for smaller teams. Changes to the qualifying session with only 1 flying lap now allowed for grid position, with the 107% rule no longer applied. Cars may not be refueled between final qualifying and race start. 2004. Engines required to last a whole race meeting. Any engine change to result in a 10th place grid penalty. Minimum weight set at a 605 kilograms during qualifying and at no less than 600 kilograms at all the other times, including driver and fuel. Pit lane speed limited to 100 km per hour at all times. Each driver must select his wet and dry tire compound before the start of the race. The minimum size of the engine cover and rear wing end plates increased to maximize advertising space. Multi-element rear wings banned and 2-element wings mandated. Launch control banned again for the second time, along with fully automatic transmissions. Rear overhang increased from 50 cm to 60 cm, reverting the change from 1991. 2005. Rear diffuser size reduced to limit downforce. All engines now required to last 2 race weekends. Qualifying format changed to 2 aggregate times from Saturday afternoon and Sunday morning to count towards grid positions. This format lasted until the European Grand Prix, when qualifying reverted to a driver's fastest single lap to count from Saturday afternoon qualifying. Further changes to dimensions of front and rear wings and nose of the car to make overtaking easier. Restrictions on tire changes during qualifying and the race itself. If a driver stalls on the grid after the parade lap, the other cars will now complete a second lap whilst the stalled vehicle is moved. In the event of a red flag, the 2-hour race clock will no longer freeze between sessions. 2006. Only 14 sets of tires allowed all weekend. 7 dry, 4 wets, and 3 extreme wets. So basically dry, intermediate and wet. In race tire changing permitted again. Qualifying format changed to 3 15-minute shootouts, where the slowest cars are eliminated in the first 2 sessions, leaving the 10 quickest to start with a clean slate to go for pole position. The final session was reduced from 20 to 15 from the French Grand Prix onward. Saturday free practice increased from 45 minutes to an hour in length. Engine capacity limited to 2,400 cc and number of cylinders allowed reduced to 8 in an attempt to reduce horsepower. Although teams were allowed to run a rev-restricted V10 for an interim period if no engine under the new regulations was available to them. Restrictions in the use of non-ferrous materials in the engine construction, along with limiting the number of valves per cylinder to 4. All engines must be of a V configuration and at an angle of 90 degrees. 2007. Tuned mass damper system banned. Rev limiter of 19,000 rotations per minute introduced. Rear wing structure strengthened to prevent flexing. Increased strength required from rear crash structure. Single tire supplier Bridgestone, after withdrawal of Michelin, revised tire regulations mean drivers must use both hard and soft compounds during the course of the race. Soft compounds tires are identified by a white stripe in one of the front tire grooves. Engine development frozen until the end of 2008 to cut costs. Further restrictions to regulations means no teams may run a third car on Friday. Both sessions on Friday extended to 90 minutes in length. Engine changes on first day of practice no longer subject to grid place penalty. Pit lane restrictions during any period the safety car is on track. Annual testing limit to 30,000 km to reduce costs. 2008. Traction control banned for the second and final time by means of all teams using a standard electronic control unit, ECU, to eliminate the possibility of teams concealing the technology within their own engine management systems. Strict limits placed on the amount of CFD and wind tunnel testing allowed each year. 2009. Banning almost all aerodynamic system devices other than front and rear wing. Slick styles allowed once more, keeping to narrow track dimensions. The limit of 8 race/qualifying engines for the whole season. Every new engine above this 8 results in a 10-place grid penalty. Rev limit decreased to 18,000 rotations per minute. Reduction of rear wing width from 1,000 mm to 750 mm, and an increase in height from 800 mm to 950 mm. Reduction in the ground clearance of the front wing from 150 mm to 50 mm, and an increase in the width from 1,400 mm to 1,800 mm. Rear diffuser to be longer and higher. Variable front aerodynamic devices permitted, with limited in-car control by the driver. And the introductions of KERS, Kinetic Energy Recovery System, which is now basically the ERS, to store some of the energy generated under braking and convert it into temporary horsepower increase of around 80 bhp. They can be used 6.6 seconds per lap by the drivers for overtaking. Pit lane is no longer closed when safety car is deployed. And another sip of my drink. 2010s. Previous regulation changes at the tail end of the first decade of the new millennium aimed at improving the show had largely proven to be a failure, with cost escalation now largely under control thanks to recent implemented budget caps and safety standards at an all-time high. The sport's focus for the new decade is around continuing to improve the race spectacle. Alongside this, however, the medium-term objective is making the sport more environmentally aware, both in an effort to secure its future in times of dwindling fossil fuel reserves, but also to bring in new sponsors put off by the sport's image of conspicuous consumption. 2010. Drastic cost-cutting measures are introduced. In-race fueling ban returns. As a result, fuel can be added to any F1 car after qualifying, but Q3 drivers must start a race with the tires they set their fastest Q2 time with. The same 8 engine limit is maintained despite the increase to 19 races over the course of the season, with the rev limiter set at 18,000 rotations per minute to assist in this. Front tire width reduced from 11 inches to 9.6 inches. A ban on testing during the season, as well as an agreement with teams about reducing the number of staff employed. 3 new teams mean 7 drivers are now dropped from Q1 and Q2. Scoring system changed to allow the first 10 cars to receive points. 25, 18, 15, 12, 10, 8, 6, 4, 2, and 1. Backmarkers no longer able to unlap themselves behind the safety car. Teams unanimously agreed to not use CUS for the 2010 season in order to allow all teams time to be able to develop and perfect their own systems. 2011. The double diffuser concept is banned, with teams requiring the use of simple single-piece diffusers. The F-duct system pioneered by McLaren is banned, in conjunction with banning shark fins from being connected to the rear wing. Adjustable front wings have also been banned. Gearboxes must last for 5 race weekends, but for the season each driver has 1 penalty free, aka a joker gearbox change at their disposal. Driver adjustable rear wing, known as DRS, drag reduction system, introduced to help overtaking, can be freely used in practice and qualifying, but in the race only when within 1 second of the next car by the detection zone, and only activated in the activation zone. DRS wing must immediately close under braking, and DRS is deactivated in the first 2 laps of each race. Plus, when a track is declared wet, it is also closed. You cannot use it then. 107% qualifying rule reintroduced following concerns about new team space. Teams agreed to reintroduce CUS with minimum car weight increasing to 20 kilograms to offset the weight of the CUS device. Sporting regulations amended to clear up last lap safety car and in qualifying in-lap procedures. Drivers are also want to be examples of road safety when driving in public, following Lewis Hamilton being pulled over following the 2010 Australian Grand Prix. FIA President Jean Todt suggests a policy similar to the NFL Personal Conduct Code for suspension or revocation of racing licenses. Ban on team orders is lifted, although FIA can use disrepute clause for misuse of it. 2012. Exhaust tailpipes raised after dispute regarding blown diffusers at the 2011 British Grand Prix. Car noses reprofiled. Reactive ride systems, exotic engine maps, and the use of helium on air guns to change tires banned. Cars must be cleared from all crash tests before pre-season testing. Races capped to 4 hours, including red flags, following the long red flag during the 2011 Canadian Grand Prix. In-season testing allowed again at the circuit at the circuit the FIA or teams, upon agreement, chose. Mugello circuit in case of 2012. Backmarkers able to unlap themselves behind safety car. 2013. Further cost-cutting measures introduced. The RS restricted to the designated zones during free practice and qualifying. Mid-season testing discontinued once more. Modesty panels introduced to compensate for the previous year's front nose reprofiling. Double DRS, pioneered by Mercedes, banned. Minimum weight increased to 642 kilograms. 2014. New car formula of turbocharged V6 engines with 1600 cc capacity and 8-speed gearbox introduced, which must now last at least 4,000 kilometers, which is 2,500 miles, before being replaced, and have the curse known as the ERS-K integrated into it. New penalty points introduced. The teams must nominate 8 gear ratios ahead of the first race. Rear beam wings and false camera mountings banned. In-season testing returns. Car nose further reprofiled. A new car number system where the driver is able to choose their own numbers for the duration of their career is also adopted. Double points awarded for the final race of the season. 2015. Further nose redesign. Drivers restricted further to 4 engines per year. Mid-season significant driver helmet designs changed. Design changes banned. Double points no longer awarded for the final race. Cars proceed into the pit lane instead of staying on the grid in an event of a red flag. 2016. Drivers allowed to use 5 engines per year as number of races is now 21. Drivers qualify for FIA Super license must be at least 18 years old and have scored 40 Super license points in recognized feeder series. 2017. Car width increased from 1800 mm to 2000 mm, reversing the 1998 change. Front tire width increased from 255 mm to 305 mm. Rear tire width increased from 325 mm to 405 mm. Car minimum weight increased to 728 kilograms. Front wings made wider at 1,800 millimeters. Teams restricted to 4 engines per year, irrespective of number of races. Engine token symbol abandoned. Power unit suppliers now obligate to supply any team without any power unit contract. Shark fins are brought back and T-wings introduced through loophole. Barge board sizes also increased. Another sip on my drink. (2018). The drivers were restricted to only 3 engines per year, despite the fact that the number of races was increased to 21. The shark fins and the T-fins have been banned again. After much debate and testing, the Halo cockpit protection device was mandatory from the 2018 season onwards. 2019. The front wing was simplified. 200mm wider, 20mm higher, and moved 25mm further forward. The rear wing was made 100mm wider, 20mm higher, and a 20mm larger DRS opening to improve DRS, reduce dirty air, and promote more overtaking. Which winglets were removed from brake ducts. Maximum fuel capacity was increased from 105 kilograms to 110 kilograms to minimize the need for drivers to conserve fuel during a race. Car's weight no longer includes driver's weight. Bonus point awarded to driver and constructor who sets race fastest lap for the first time since 1955, but the driver must finish in a point scoring position to receive the bonus point. And now we're in the last part, which is basically 2020 and 2021. In 2020, teams allowed one additional MGU-K replacement. Free practice sessions now count towards super license points. Requiring at least 100 kilometers, 62 miles, without infractions to receive one, with a limit of 10 super license points across a 3-season period from free practice sessions. The last 50 millimeters of the front ring must not contain any metal as a puncture prevention measure. From the Italian Grand Prix, drivers must use the same engine mode in both qualifying and the race, thereby banning the engine party modes. 2021. A budget cap of a whopping $145 million will be introduced. The double axis system, DAS, system pioneered by Mercedes will be banned. Teams agreed to use the 2020 cars in 2020, with development being done on token basis as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic disrupting car development. Cars will be under Parc Fermé rule conditions, following the end of free practice 3 instead of qualifying. And there you have it. Those are all the changes that have been seen in Formula 1. And yeah, this is the longest podcast I've ever done in my entire life. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed it. If you've made it this far into the video, leave a like, and also comment down below what surprised you the most. And if you have anything else you want to have a podcast about, then let me know in the comment section down below. Also subscribe if you haven't already. And yeah, I will catch you guys in another live stream tomorrow. See ya!